Hello, I'm Kevin Benedict, Senior Analyst for Digital Transformation here at Cognizant, and want to thank you for joining us today. I'm very excited to have you guys back as an audience and have just an incredible panel join us today on one of the most interesting subjects we can imagine, robotics and intelligent process automation today, and how that's going to impact our companies, our businesses, and maybe even the economy and the workforce out there. So, without any further ado, let me introduce you to our audience. Rob Brown. Rob, wave your hand there.
Hey, Kevin. Hello, audience. Good to be back with you again.
Now, Rob he's a director for the, senior director for the Center for the Future of Work at Cognizant, focuses on business process services and all kinds of things involving automation. So, Rob, where are you calling in from today?
Calling in from the home office in San Anselmo, California, just about 15 miles north of the Golden Gate Bridge in the Bay Area. It's foggy today, as we tend to do in San Francisco, but good to be with you guys.
Thanks, Rob. And our next guest, let me introduce you to Matt Smith. Matt is the consulting lead for intelligent process automation at Cognizant. Matt, thanks for joining today.
Hey, Kevin, thank you. It's good to talk to you again.
Yeah, absolutely. And where are you calling in from?
So I'm in Frisco, Texas, which, for those of you who haven't been to the Metroplex area, it's a suburb town of Dallas, straight up the Dallas North Tollway, about 20 miles north of downtown.
All right, and our third panelist is Sal Novin. Sal, you're with TriZetto. You're AVP of HPA Services. Tell us what that means to us, Sal.
Sure. HPA Services stands for Healthcare Process Automation, and we are also known as affectionately known, I hope, as the robot guys within TriZetto. I am coming from Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm actually live in Nashville, but here this week as part of my daughter's Destination Imagination tournament. So coming to you live, still from within Tennessee. So.
Very good, and congratulate your daughter for us there. So we have one of the most interesting topics. We're talking about smart machines. We're talking about machine learning. We're talking about automation, all these kinds of things, and robotics. Now, I'm going to read a statement here. You guys tell me if you agree with this. When work is physical, it takes a physical robot to get the work done. However, when the work is digital, it takes a digital robot to get the work done. What's your thoughts on that, Sal?
Certainly better to do it digitally. Our robots work that way. Interestingly enough, just as an aside, a joke, if you will, one of the things that we try to do to explain how our robots work is we actually are building a mechanical robot above a keyboard. It's kind of one of our team side projects that we kind of goof around with at work. But the idea is to demonstrate to people that really get people comfortable about the idea of a system interacting with another system. Whether it's mechanical or whether it's purely digital, ultimately the result is that you are making decisions based on what you see and you're entering it back into the system. It's kind of designed as a mechanism for people to understand the concept of virtual machines. It's not so virtual.
Got it. So let me just open it up to Matt and Rob. So digital robots, what's that mean to you?
So I'll jump in and give my perspective. Clearly, the robots that you can see, that you can feel, that unload ships, paint cars, do welding, they're really, really tangible, and so that's what immediately comes to mind when people think about this discussion of robots. That the IT services industry has been having for the better part, really now of 2 to 3 years. RPA, robotic process automation, is what we're talking about. But the robot part of that is a little bit misleading because, as you guys alluded to, we're talking about digital or virtual robots that sit at desktops or workstations. But that's not to minimize the impact. I mean, the impact that they are bringing to knowledge process work is real. And from my perspective, I really do feel like this is the first on-ramp of sorts for businesses that are about to take the leap forward into digital process transformation. There are things you can do with robots for the enterprise today to get on that on-ramp to help make your process run better. But I think increasingly, as we think about digital transformation that may move beyond just robots, that's going to help businesses run different. And that's where I think we're going to take this conversation a little bit into artificial intelligence, talk a little bit about the intersect of things like Code Halo as a part of that bigger digital canvas. But robots are here today. They just don't look like C-3PO or the Terminator, hopefully.
Very good. So before we go any further, let's really talk about some definitions here. I'm going to jump back out to Matt now. And Matt, let's talk about definitions. I hear things like digital process automation, robotic process automation. We like to use the term intelligent process automation. Help us understand what these various terms mean and why we've selected to use the definitions that we do.
Yeah, it's really we've got a couple of worlds colliding, Kevin. I think in terms of the terminology today, there's the real definitions that I think we would really do ourselves well to ground these discussions in. And so, for example, robotic process automation has become an industry accepted term to define a kind of a category of software that, as Rob was describing, it replicates the way a person does a process or a set of tasks today. And so RPA software, as it's called, it's got some fairly consistent rules as you look at all the different providers and vendors that offer that kind of technology. And I think the term robot has really been served well in that regard because almost by definition, that software doesn't, quote, think. It does what it's programmed to do, and it does it the same way each and every time. And that's been part of the real value of that software, as Sal said, where you can go digital, do it because you get a lot of benefits. I think where we're starting to move and where it's getting very interesting and also a little confusing is into the world of artificial intelligence, and what does that mean? And then you start to hear terms like machine learning and deep learning, which have real firm definitions for the disciplines and really from where those terms came from. We're starting to see them applied a lot today in context of robotic process automation, and I think that's where people are starting to get a little bit, in some cases, maybe confused with where the terms are heading, and in some cases, I think it's making people pause a bit and say, really, are we really ready for AI and artificial intelligence? And in some cases, I think Sal's going to give us some examples. Yeah, it's not only are we ready, it's here today. But those are kind of the terms, Kevin, that seem to be dominating the conversation today. And I think we could spend some good time here in the next few minutes just kind of working through them and talk about what they mean and where they apply.
Yeah, and I would just jump in on that, Kevin. Matt hit the nail on the head, which is, we talked about robots. Robots are here today. AI, after a fashion, is here today, and more than after a fashion, it is here. It's real. It's driving impact. But we ran the survey, The Robot and I, out of your and my part of Cognizant, the Center for the Future of Work, and really what we found very clearly in that 537 executives surveyed was the notion that robotics and automation for automation's sake is a one-way ticket to efficiency gain, which is a good thing, no doubt about it. But what the data showed clearly is the release of all of the information, the data, the metadata around the processes by shrinking and collapsing process workflows, not collapsing in a bad way, but in a good way, shortening cycle times. And that data release, ripe for analytics, meaning making, artificial intelligence, is where the real story is at. And to Matt's point, sort of like a generation ago in the services space, we used to talk about offshore delivery, and then everybody in the industry wanted to talk. Really, it's not about offshore; it's about a true global delivery model, sourcing talent wherever you can. So the analogy I would say is, the industry has adopted the term RPA, but really the story is about the intelligence. And so that's why we have made the case that this is about intelligent process automation, fast forwarding us on an on-ramp to true artificial intelligence and all of the power that can accrue to the enterprise, to the business, to people, to the workplace, to society, etc. So that's how I see it.
Oh, I am sorry.
Sounds like Sal's in fire drill.
We have set off a fire drill, literally and figuratively.
So Sal, maybe you can find a way of using it. That'd be great until that gets over. So let me throw it back out to Matt and Rob right now. Now, Rob, you recently wrote a paper called "Robots and I" about this subject. So Robots and I: How New Digital Technologies Are Making Smart People Smarter. In that, you said we are entering a new era of human-machine interface for repetitive and rote processes in which software tools have emerged as the robots for knowledge work. Do you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I think that is definitely the thesis of the paper, which is, right now RPA, as Matt alluded to, RPA is about repetitive and rote processes and applying robots to execute those just as people would. And this is where sort of the application and software developers of the world will sort of say, okay, come on, haven't we been automating forever? What's really different this time about these software tools that are effectively robots? And what we're still seeing after all of the automation we've done around core systems is that there are still a lot of repetitive and rote tasks that require people to sort of engage in what I would call swivel chair activities, sort of entering data between screens, between systems to, repetitively get data integrated. And so what the power of RPA can do is to, truly eliminate that long tail, if you like, of repetitive and rote tasks. So it is about the human-machine interface of those tasks. But I think what you're going to start to see very quickly around the process value chains, whether it's your mortgage process or your claims process or processes that Sal's robots cover in the healthcare space, is in a world of instrumented things, the Internet of Things, dare I say it, nanotechnologies, things like iBeacons for in-store retail experience. You will see artificial intelligence applied on top of the smart robots that are just executing repetitive and rote tasks. And that's what's really exciting about sort of being at this juncture of what the respondents in the Robot and I were projecting for the next 3 to 5 years. So it's coming, and it's coming pretty quickly. But the end game of this is about the intelligence and what you're learning about the process to run it differently and run it more impactfully in a digital future.
Got it. So let me just open it up to the panel here. Why now? Why is now the time for intelligent process automation as opposed to 5 years ago?
Great question, Kevin. And I'll throw in my opinion. I think, again, I love when a convergence of occurrences happen, and I think we're at one of those points right now. The ability of automated technologies to do what they do has really reached a point of critical mass. So from a capability point of view, you've got that as a foundation. At the same time, there's this other thing occurring out there, really on the consumer side of the world, but it's very rapidly working its way back into large organizations, which is the whole idea of the digital business and what does that mean and what are the impacts of being a digital organization. So I think we're seeing automation happening, for lack of a better term, in the inside of the organization, and back offices, middle, and further, increasingly in front office. We have digitization happening between consumers and business. For example, Domino's announced last week you can now order pizza on Twitter. And on the surface you look at that and you go, okay, well, how hard could that be? The reality is there was probably a whole lot of digital change that had to happen inside of that organization to allow them to start to engage with their consumers in that fashion. So I'm going to bet there's automation. They had to rework some systems. They had to change the way their process and their fulfillment, their delivery mechanisms work to do all that. So I think we're seeing kind of this two worlds, the consumer and digitization happening, and at the same time automation inside of organizations. And where they're impacting, it's creating opportunities and it's creating need for companies to be able to move faster and to look at data in different ways and again, as Rob said, to get ultimately to better outcomes for the constituents. So.
Got it. So, Sal, is the advent of robotics, is that due to hardware improvements, software improvements, or just the people getting creative? We might have lost them. So let's put this back.
We lost Sal. We lost Sal. He's having a digital moment, or at least a mechanical. There was a fire alarm. I hope he's not burning. I hope his robot didn't take aim and fire at him. Was that the alarm? The Sal Novan Death Star will self-destruct in 5 minutes. Oh, God.
That's funny. So let me just ask the remaining panelists here, guys. Let's talk about this. Is the advent where we are today with robotics and intelligent process automation, is that the results of advances in hardware, software, or just advances in us getting creative?
Look, I think it's also it's all the things that Matt talked about, you know, the advances in the technology, the capability of technology, but it's also us getting more creative, right? Future of work, the future of work agenda. Actually, guys, I will go totally old school and analog with you. And this is something I saw. Yes, I still take the newspaper, old school and analog. But San Francisco Chronicle this morning, you guys may have seen it where you are. There is an oil spill off the coast of Santa Barbara. Okay, so over 100,000 gallons of crude oil have now spilled out into the Santa Barbara Channel in the last 24 hours. I picked up from this, buried down in the fine print on page 2, odor was the tip-off. The ruptured pipeline in Santa Barbara was discovered only after authorities went to the beach to investigate reports of a foul smell. So tell me, guys, in a world of, you know, instrumented process, all of the cool things we talk about, automation, code halos, sensor-enabled, etc., it was only until authorities went down to the beach to discover a foul smell was generated by a ruptured pipeline spilling down into a culvert and out in the Pacific Ocean. So I think, you know, whether it's the environmental movement, whether it's medical science, whether it's the pharmaceutical sector searching for a cure for cancer, like these forces of creativity, of demand, in terms of what the art of the possible is really driving businesses and people and consumers to think about how to use these technologies in new ways. So robotics is one part of the story, but I also think it's that bigger canvas of what the art of the possible is from digital to help us get there. And again, it goes back to the intelligence and being able to pick up those moments of intelligence to, you know, act at a critical moment. Sal, I was just making a joke that your fire alarm was going off, but I thought, was it your robot taking aim through the camera and firing? You know, so Sal will self-destruct in 5 minutes.
Yeah, you know, isn't it awesome? I'm fully expecting somebody to just blast through the door and say, "Come with me," right now. I'm from the future. I think everything that could have possibly gone wrong, from, you know, the fire alarm to the Wi-Fi then going out. You know, thankfully I am safe though, so all is good.
So still, we were just talking about, the question was, why now for intelligent process automation? Is it advances in hardware, software, or just us getting more creative that has brought this to the forefront today? Let's get your thoughts on that, and then we'll talk about some actual case studies that we're seeing out there.
Sure. So the big thing is that I think it's a lot of little things that have piled up. So if you think of just your Bluetooth headset, and thinking about why didn't we have something like that years ago when we had just regular phones. You think of Bluetooth and the digital that had to go behind it, and the ability to transmit not just analog signals but to transmit digital signals, receive them, et cetera, et cetera. All those things were small steps that led to a major change. And I think that's very true for RPA. The small steps are things like, and they're not so small in and of themselves, but they led up to this. But Amazon, great example, right? The digitization of everything. Books, hard copy books. Now we read most of our written content online. Even books that were books are written in a digital format. Music has gone completely digital. Payment has gone completely digital. All things that were, required a brick and mortar presence, but also required a tangible piece of hardware to do stuff. Now that you don't need that anymore, everything is digital. The connectivity is digital. It allows this era of virtual technology to really break through, because you would have a hard stop somewhere. If you look at even the healthcare reimbursement space, is a great example of that. Is one of the key hard stops in healthcare was the fax machine, and it's still ubiquitous in many places, and that's why in terms of adoption and so on, we are finding greater adoption with folks that have gone into the digital EDI, if you will, with their data transfer. The adoption is much higher because we don't have to deal with hard copies of paper and faxes and images and so on. But those are some key reasons why that we're able to do so many things virtually compared to 5-10 years ago when there wasn't quite so much virtualization of just about everything else.
Got it. So talk to us about what you're seeing out there from your perspective that are real life case studies out there.
Yeah, so I mean, we're looking at so healthcare process automation, healthcare being the key word there. Most of the work that we look at has been in healthcare, but over the past 6 months, especially with the acquisition of by Cognizant of TriZetto, we've been able to look at new opportunities with other client partners. I can speak in depth about some of the stuff we're able to do on the healthcare side. So simply stated, most of the work that comes across in the healthcare world is digital. Reimbursement is all digital. You go to a doctor. Most folks now have primary care physicians with practice management systems that electronically send claims to the payer. Most of your information is contained electronically at the hospital, etc. And what that allows us to do is basically go and make decisions at a level that you would actually not even get with people. And that's one of my key focuses in terms of helping people understand robotic process automation and artificial intelligence. All these things are not simply to replace, but actually augment far beyond the capacity of what people could do. And that's actually one of those things. When we go in and, for example, validate something as simple as provider information, so the hospital information, believe it or not, that is one of the most common forms of rejection, is that in reimbursement is when simple pieces of information about a hospital are not contained properly in one system or another. With people, you could go and spend a certain amount of time, a certain number of what they call provider validation steps or provider matching steps, where you would have a person match on 5 or 10 criteria. Robotic process automation, I can do those 5 or 10 checks in a few seconds compared to a few minutes, literally. What does that allow me to do? Well, it allows me to do more work, but it also allows me to layer on quality at every single step. That performance buys me the ability to go in and say, I'm going to validate 50 items. I'm going to go and validate 100 items, and I'm going to cross-reference and check other things too. All within the span of time that would be still within 1/10 of what a person would do. So the other beautiful thing about virtualization is scale. Not only do I get the performance boost from a single robot in a virtual machine, I can now create hundreds, thousands of virtual machines, essentially thousands of claims examiners doing the work of what you'd have a few of these folks doing. And you can think of them as super users. Now I can go and do not just much more within the same span of time, but increase my overall workforce. And those are some things that I think are interesting, because they really, now robotic process automation, kind of like what I was saying with Amazon and music, the music industry going to MP3s and all this digitization of other industries, this is RPA moving other industries forward. Now we can do things that you couldn't do before. And at the end of the day, the value goes back to the consumer, because ultimately a failed reimbursement doesn't, it affects everybody in business, but it actually affects outcomes for people. Everybody can relate to the fact that they have gone to the doctor's office, they've, maybe it's a loved one, especially with an aging population, someone taking care of an elderly parent, and they go to the doctor and they get a get something back that says you owe this much, and the immediate reaction is no, I thought I was covered. That everybody can relate to that, and the outcome is better results, fewer errors, and therefore an overall efficiency in the system. The administrative cost of healthcare, most people don't realize, is 20% of the cost of all healthcare in the United States. That's a huge number for administration, and far exceed the cost of administration in many other industries where it's 5-7% and so on. So the ability to take something that was improve upon the existing process through digitization, then add more, do more, and at the end of the day, a better value, a better outcome for everyone.
So, Sal, it seems to me that the more and more processes that business digitize and that are automated, and then you build these kind of intelligent processes, automation systems over them, you are creating a far more accurate system. The data is validated far more often and quicker, and it's more accurate, and that would result in likely the ability to better analyze that for process improvement, I would imagine. Talk to me about that.
Sure, and actually that even gets into some of the machine learning that we do. We refer to our supervised machine learning as what we call so now what. A lot of what we do in healthcare, we can't just kind of let the robots loose and figure stuff out on their own for very obvious reasons. However, supervised learning is one of the oldest forms of machine learning, and what that really means is when you think of machine learning, there's 3 stages really: adapt, detect, and improve. So the adapt really just means that the robot adapt to circumstances? In other words, if the system crashes, if there's a network outage, if the fire alarm happens to go off, can the robot adapt to that and not crash also? And that's key in a virtual environment. Sorry?
No, go ahead.
Sorry? I was just going to say so we can go and we can adapt to the circumstances that we're dealing with in terms of the robot potentially encountering a failure of the system, but not crashing. So it can restart the system. If the operating system, if the network goes down, there's robots managing other robots that allow them to react to the issue and deal with it. Right down to the more minutia. So if the workflow, something changes as far as a compliance or regulatory rule, and it encounters something it hasn't seen, it adapts by not just, I like to use the Excel macro. Everybody's familiar with that. You have your hotkey, you start your Excel macro off in the wrong place, and you hope to God that you've saved your changes. With our robot, the analogy there is that the Excel macro does not start off in the wrong place. It starts off, it knows that it's in the right place. If you put it in the wrong place, it will detect it. That's the adapt. That's also part of the detect. It can detect those things, and then it can say, and it sends us actually literally a text message and an email to our support staff and says, I've encountered something new. And this is not an error. We like to stay away from the word error because it's real life. I mean, real life is full of errors. It's just an anomalous situation. And so it'll text and email us, and we will go look at it, and then we will apply the rules and the decision making to say, okay, we've detected that problem. Now, here's the steps we want you to take to address it. So in a healthcare environment, that could be a new provider warning message that came along. And so it says, okay, I've not seen this error message before. I'm not just going to go simply click OK, because it's different from the other ones. What would you like me to do? And we can go and improve, and that's the last step to improve the process.
It really sounds like this is the data-driven decision-making that we all have strived for a long time.
It absolutely is. To that extent, too, the one thing that we always like to describe is the amount of metadata that we create when we do the work. we don't just do the work, but it's like a person. In one of our videos, we say it's like a user writing a diary of all the work they were performing that day as they were performing it. But in our case, at the millisecond level. So what does that mean? It means about, for our average client, 4 gigs of metadata of the work they perform. And that's all, falls into the whole big data buzz that's going on. But the analytics, the capability to do fine-tuning and process improvement based on things that we see. A lot of times in healthcare, you have large shops of people reviewing thousands of claims, and they see, one error is hard to detect among everyone. However, with robots and those analytics, those errors bubble to the surface, so we can go in and improve that. I like to refer to it almost as the eyewitness testimony of an examiner. They've got a lot on their plate, they're doing a lot, and they happen to notice something when it's a pain. They don't necessarily, they don't at all do quantitative analysis of the issues they found. They just notice something, and it's more intuitive. Sometimes we find that those issues are not issues at all because we've got the data to back it up and support that, hey, this is the type of thing that we need to improve upon.
Got
so
it.
It's really a game changer in that regard.
So let me just ask the rest of the panel, Rob, Matt, any of you guys, let's talk about the difference. There's some words that were thrown out there quite a bit, things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning. Can you guys take a shot at explaining those to me?
I'd just jump in on as you rightly pointed out, a couple of things that Sal touched on, and for me, what he was describing in terms of the application of robotic process automation and the artificial intelligence, so now what? Ultimately, at the end of that, the outcome was a better customer experience. And Sal, you hit the nail on the head, man. Everybody, particularly in the U.S., that experience that you described with the elderly loved one, the child who's sick, we know what that experience is like, and it's been awful. Is the claim covered? Is it not covered? So ultimately, what I see is there's a value chain, and as Sal rightly pointed out, the friction points in those value chains, whether it's fax or hey, I have to put in an input. Now, what we're doing is we're able to change the process through intelligent process automation so that the customer experience is better. And you could look at any process value chain just about that's out there, whether it is truly an end user customer, like in healthcare, or what I would call, if it's a supplier or a partner, a constituent in that process value chain. It's going to be improved. So it's much as we talk about, Kevin, and I know you had Ben Pring on here talking about his customer experience work that he did out of the Center for the Future of Work, improving that experience to augment. It's about the journey of the customer and not the rote transaction. So as Sal pointed out, the experiences of these, all of us, it's about the problems with the process transaction as opposed to, hey, it's Sal and his elderly mother or whomever coming in, and how can we give them the best care possible. And that to me really is where we talk about, it's about man and machine, the human and the bot, the robot and I motif that we've used in our white paper to describe that complementary symbiosis of people and machines. So now when we talk about artificial intelligence and taking the next plunge into deep learning and being able to overlay artificial intelligence and machine learning, in layers to be able to really drive to something that, for a lot of us, the touchstone right now is IBM's Watson, where you could start to extrapolate, as Sal said, gigabytes of data and metadata about a claims process, move it back upstream into the payer, the provider, the patient, and ultimately into even the pharmaceutical industry to get feedback about how all of these experiences are really impacting something like the search for the cure for cancer, for example, which is what IBM is trying to do with Watson. And you extrapolate that into every other arena in processes in industries. I think what we're going to find is each industry is going to hit, we kind of use the metaphor we use is they will hit a melting point where there is a time and a place, much as we're removing faxes out of the process friction point, a melting point where all of these forces come together. And as Sal said, we've seen it in the music industry. We've seen it in the newspaper industry, media, right? Those are all of the touchstone areas where this has happened. But now other industries, particularly with B2B processes, it's kind of happened in B2C. We're going to see it in B2B now. And I heard one analyst describe this a couple of weeks ago. B2C, in terms of disruption, was the earthquake, and the B2B follow-on from that will be the tsunami that will really change the game, melt some of these processes. And again, when I say melt, that's in a good way, right? It's a positive. It's sort of like you change the state of a metal by heating it, and digital and artificial intelligence and robotics will do that. So the time is very short, and the data in the Robot and I white paper sort of tried to telegraph in 2 to 3 to 5 years out where this is going to happen, at what process area, and on what timeline. So I don't know if I actually answered your question about deep learning and machine learning, but I think a lot of these forces are colliding, and it's not just one definitional term versus another. It's a confluence of those factors and forces.
Got it. So Matt, let's go over to you. You're out talking to clients regularly. Where are clients? Do clients get this? And if they do or not, but tell us what they're asking for and where they have the aha moments.
Yeah. So again, let's borrow from the consumer world for a second. And what clients are asking us for in Cognizant is, think about when you, Kevin, sit down at your computer at home or your laptop at home, and you pop up the browser, and whether it's Google or whatever you use, browser-wise, it knows what you bought in the past. It knows where you are. It's showing you a weather icon that tells you based on your city what it looks like. All these pieces of content are served up to you based on just this complex history. The code halo, Cognizant calls it. But this complex history that you have created over time. A lot of clients are looking at Cognizant saying, can you do the same kind of a thing for our employees and the systems that they use? So whether it's a claims agent, or it could be somebody in a clinical environment, it could be a physician and a tablet interacting with a patient, it could be billing systems, bank tellers. The point is, we get so much functionality out of our personal devices that hasn't yet worked its way into the business world, and that's really where clients are looking to Cognizant for help. And connect all those dots for me. Automation, machine learning, which is what one of the technologies that these browser companies use to make that experience work, is machine learning. Help me apply those technologies, data analytics, connect all that together for me, and make my employees, my workforce, more productive, enable them to work faster, enable them to do the things that they do well, and not be slowed down by a machine or confined or constrained based on the way the system is today. So I think that's where it's really getting exciting. Is the demand is there. Again, as we've talked, the technologies are appearing and are becoming more capable. And now we're getting the creativity, as Rob mentioned, to start to apply all this to some really great use cases. So that's where we're focused.
Awesome. Sal, talk to us about how many claims TriZetto actually processes on an annual basis.
That is a huge number. I can tell you that with 53% of the U.S. population running on TriZetto systems, it's 170, I believe, 170 million people. By far, if it was a health plan, it would be by far the largest. For our robots, we can talk a little bit about what we process on average per client. It can vary greatly from the small health plans to the large health plans. And in that regard, we're looking at it not so much in terms of pure transactions, but what else can we do? So, where you might have one health plan with 100,000 transactions per month, let's say, on average. That's for your average 200,000, 300,000 member health plan. You can kind of extrapolate upwards for the larger Blues plans and the national carriers. You know, we can take care of all that, but some of the interesting things that we're doing is actually in other areas, not just claims processing, but enrollment, billing, refunds, recoveries of payments that have gone out the door. Things like that, and also TriZetto has a notable presence on the provider side in the form of their TriZetto Provider Services, formerly Gateway EDI, which is a tremendous launching point for us to go into some of the provider market and help with the incoming work that's the inbound work, if you will. Not to veer too far off topic, but the reason why I mentioned those two in particular is that brings a new paradigm that we think we are at an amazing crossroads to be able to take advantage of in healthcare and then demonstrate that in other industries, is what we call R2R automation, or robot to robot. And that is when a hospital is using our robot and an insurance company is also using our robot. One of the things that pains both industries the most is, well, our systems don't communicate with one another. Interactivity and EDI, they are a vast improvement from picking up the phone and making a phone call. It saves both of them money. But then if you look at what a robot can do, a robot is essentially a resource that is available 24/7, has the time, can be scaled. And so taking some of the deficiencies of certain systems, whether it be communication or otherwise, and rather than forcing humans to work differently with them, so you've got a doctor who now has to do things, their workflow has to be accommodated to the system because it's a legacy system, and replacing it would cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Now that doctor can go and focus on what they need to focus on. And the robot can communicate with another robot and accommodate for the discrepancies of the system. In healthcare, a lot of people are surprised to hear this, but there are health plans, health plans that limit the number of inbound phone calls for things like authorizations, for example, where they say, we will only accept X number of calls per day so that we can force providers to go to an EDI-based system. But is that a good thing or a bad thing? If the system is broken, or if it only gets you so far and you've got huge volumes of transactions, especially with things like the Accountable Care Act getting more Americans insured, one of the things that's creating is more work. And as a result, these systems were never designed. I mean, many of these systems were designed 10, 20 years ago. They weren't designed for this volume, this level of work. Robot-to-robot interactions can account for that. It's like having a person now not only aid with the system or just improve the workflow or improve the quality of the EDI. The robot can now go and tell the other robot, let's figure this out. Let's provide a solution that wasn't even there before. A true workflow that can be completely customized between the relationship with one hospital and one insurance provider. And those I think are also huge game changers. Every aspect of what we look at in terms of the improvement of the data model, the improvement of automation and through RPA is really an opportunity to not only resolve issues that have been there forever or are growing, but to actually improve upon the system and provide a change that wasn't even possible before.
So let me ask the panel here this question. Is intelligent process automation one of the important solutions that will help reduce healthcare and improve service?
I'll jump in on that one and say absolutely. And the key to doing that, as Sal has described, and Matt too, it's here today. This is something that companies, I think there's everybody hears about digital tsunami, and so forth, and it's sort of overwhelming in terms of, my God, I gotta boil my entire value chain. I gotta digitally transform it. It's going to take me forever. And in terms of being able to start somewhere, and this isn't just incrementalism, but being able to take steps. Matt, I know some of the things we can. It's weeks, if not months, to be able to make it happen, as opposed to a years-long rip and replace systems implementation. And so I think the answer is absolutely yes. And Sal and I were both down at the HCC conference this week in Orlando in healthcare, and I sat in on the session that was given. It was fantastic by a thinker in this space called Nicholas Webb, and he has just written a book called Breakers. And the thesis of that book is, you look at sort of the hacker community, or to put it I think in better terminology, people that have looked at existing processes and written code to digitize process steps, to remove the friction points that we were alluding to a little bit earlier. And Webb was saying that with the advent of mobility, social mobile, and talk about the SMAC stack, with the advent of the mobile device, those developers have effectively melted something like 3,000 friction points in existing processes already, and that number is about to explode. And so that's pretty fascinating. You talk about process melting points. Very quickly, you can look at your entire value chain, and the analogy I'm starting to use is it's almost like acupuncture, right? Where can you drop, much like an acupuncture, a needle? Find a choke point, find a friction point. If it's removing the facts, so be it, to yield outsized value for your process, and that's coming very, very quickly. So this notion of you don't need to boil the ocean, but you can find your your cup of water in that process workflow and boil that cup of water and drive great change. And I think RPA, and the technology we talked about are a great stepping stone to get us on that journey today.
Got it. So Matt, we're going to have to, and panel, everyone on the panel, we're going to have to wrap this up for today. I'm going to conclude with a question to Matt. Matt, how does a company even begin to think about where is the value from intelligent process automation for them and their systems? If they invite you in and you're sitting in a conference room talking to them and they say, you know what, I'm buying into the concept here, where do I even start? How do you approach that?
Great question, Kevin. So what we would always say is it's never automation for automation's sake. So yeah, we could probably walk in and find a half a dozen places to throw automation. What we would prefer to do is understand what, whether it's pain points or goals, objectives, really what is the organization trying to do, and we really begin with that. It's the idea is let's work with the desired outcome and kind of work backwards and let that be what dictates where we apply automation and really what level and what type of automation. And we find when we approach it that way, it might take a step or two longer to get all those people into concurrence about what the right outcome is that they're trying to achieve, but everybody is much happier than in situations where we simply look for, proverbial low-hanging fruit and we automate something and they go, yeah, okay, that was cool, but didn't really change the trajectory of my business a whole lot. So we always like to start with the outcome, Kevin, work backwards from there, and let that dictate to us what kind of technology we apply, how, and so forth. So great question.
So in one case, it might be to improve quality, reduce errors, others reduce costs, others might be speed up the process to support a more real-time environment. Are those all examples, Matt?
Yeah, those are all great examples, and that's really where the conversation should begin.
Got it. With that, I want to thank Sal and Rob and Matt for sharing again your insights around intelligent process automation. And if anyone's interested, come talk to us at Cognizant, and I'll give you the information here in the article that you see this video embedded in. You can see the contact information there. If you're interested in talking process automation, deep learning, machine learning, artificial intelligence with these brilliant panelists, please let us know. With that, thank you again for joining.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks,
guys. Bye-bye.